Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. North Carolina lawmakers could push to take more powers away from the governor this week. A final vote is coming up on the REINS Act. It would let the Republican-controlled legislature block new rules proposed by state agencies overseen by the state's Democratic governor. GOP lawmakers say it'll create more accountability and reduce regulatory costs for businesses. Critics fear public health or public safety could be at risk. WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran has been covering the debate over the bill, and he joins us now by phone. Will, good to be with you.
Nice to talk to you.
This week, legislators will debate a bill that critics see as a power grab. What does it do?
So this bill is called the REINS Act, and it essentially wants to rein in state government regulation, hence the name. And it says that there needs to be a cost analysis for any new rules or regulations proposed by the state. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is environmental regulations, but there's plenty of rules about elections and roads and everything. Anything that affects businesses. And it says that if it hits a certain cost threshold, then that rule can only be approved if the legislature votes to approve it.
So why do sponsors think this thing is needed?
Well, what we heard from the bill sponsor, who is a Republican Representative Alan Chesser from Nash County, he said that regulation is basically the second biggest driver of costs for people and for businesses in North Carolina after inflation. So, there's not a whole lot the state legislature can do to tackle inflation, but they think that there is something they can do to tackle regulation. So say that the state Department of Environmental Quality wants to put some new air pollution rules in place. But, power companies say, well, we can do that, but it's going to cost us $50 million to do, and we're going to have to pass those costs on to people who pay their bills. And so the legislature would then step in and say, okay, is it worth it? Is that extra cost that would be passed on to the customers worth whatever public health benefits that we get from reducing pollution? That's kind of the general theme of what the legislature imagines this looking like.
And what do critics have to say about it?
Well, they say that it is just completely untenable. They say in this deeply divided political environment that we're in, that there's no way that the legislature is going to do much of anything. And they also say it's just not reasonable to ask the legislature to take on this job. They're already in charge of passing other laws, writing the new state budget, holding oversight and accountability hearings for state government. And they say to ask them to start analyzing highly technical scientific data is just not reasonable, especially, when most lawmakers are older, a lot of them are retirees, and, really none of them have any sort of scientific background or experience. They say it just doesn't really make a lot of sense for the legislature to be taking on this role. What supporters of the bill push back against that, and they say, well, think about it like a trial. When you have a trial, you have it decided by a jury, and they are not experts. But a lot of times, especially in business trials, it can get into really complex technical scientific issues, and both sides get the chance to put on their data, have their experts make their case, and then you have the non-experts, the jury, decide who wins. And they kind of see themselves, the legislature, acting as the jury in the future with fights between businesses and state regulators.
What does the law say about this? Does the Constitution say anything about who should hold these kinds of powers or responsibilities?
Yes, that is another issue that critics have brought up. They say that this is just a clearly unconstitutional power grab, that it's the job of the executive branch to regulate businesses, to pass rules that, enforce the laws, execute the laws, hence the name the executive branch. And they say that this is just yet another example of the Republican-led legislature trying to steal power from Governor Josh Stein and other executive branch leaders that belongs in that branch. They say this is unconstitutional and will get sued over if it becomes law. But that has not stopped the legislature in the past. And, courts can always change the definition or their interpretation of what constitutional powers do belong to each branch of government. So this is definitely something that we could be talking about for a long time to come.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll explore other legislation that shifts power from the executive branch to the state legislature. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran about a new bill that would shift power from the Democratic governor to Republicans in the legislature. Will, I'm sensing a theme here. Haven't there been other bills this session that siphon power from the governor?
Yes, and of course, it goes far beyond just this session, but it's still going on. And recently, we've seen bills, for example, to take away the governor's power to appoint who he wants to replace vacancies when a prosecutor retires. And this comes as the Johnston County District Attorney Susan Doyle plans to step down in a couple of weeks, more than a year before the end of her term. Normally, Josh Stein would, and currently still can, appoint anyone that he would like to fill that job, which probably would mean a Democrat. Republicans are trying to quickly pass a new law before she leaves office that would require him to fill that job with a Republican. It would say that he would have to copy basically the same political party of whoever left that job. And there have been other efforts to do that with other vacancies, on the Council of State, with judges, things like that, and just really make it harder, whenever Republicans leave office, for the governor to replace them with a Democrat of his choosing. So, that's one that's currently making its way through the legislature. There are obviously others that have made their way through the legislature. They're now in court. Those include efforts to take away the elections board from the governor, give that to Republican State Auditor Dave Bullock instead, to basically take away the governor's power to hire or fire the leader of the State Highway Patrol without the legislature's approval, to take away the governor's power over the State Utilities Commission, which, regulates energy policy here in North Carolina and can shoot down requests by Duke Energy to try to raise people's bills. There are more examples, obviously, but those are some of the most recent ones that are targeting Josh Stein specifically.
And this isn't just a Republicans versus Democrats thing. This has been going on for a while, and there have been some situations where the Republican legislature has tried to take power from the Republican governor, right?
Exactly. Whenever Josh Stein or Roy Cooper before him have sued the legislature, which has been many, many times over these power grabs, one of the main court cases that they cite is this case called McCrory v. Berger, named after Republican Governor Pat McCrory and Republican State Senate Leader Phil Berger. And, this happened back in, over a decade ago now, when McCrory was governor and the legislature was looking to take more power again, same theme as the REINS Act, over environmental regulation away from the governor's office. That happened actually in the wake of the big coal ash spill by Duke Energy that polluted the Dan River back in, I think it was 2013. And the legislature essentially wanted to take away the governor's power to react to things like that and, come down on Duke Energy. And that led to a very seminal court case here in North Carolina that did a little bit more to establish what exactly the separation of power should be for appropriate checks and balances between the executive and legislative branches. But we've also seen changes in the courts. That case was actually ruled on by a Republican Supreme Court, the McCrory v. Berger case. And we've seen the court, shift over to Democratic control, which was a little bit more skeptical of the legislature, even than that previous Republican court had been. And now it has slingshotted back. We have Republican full control of the Supreme Court in the state now, and they are very much on the side of the legislature in all of these fights. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of how, state law, state precedent changes, assuming that, if this does pass and there's a lawsuit over it.
So what's going to happen next with the REINS Act?
Well, it should come up pretty quickly here in the legislature. We're expecting some action this coming week, probably in the next couple of days. And the House and the Senate have each passed slightly different versions of this. And so it's now back in the House where it started, and they need to decide if they're going to just sign off on what the Senate did or if they're going to make a few more tweaks of their own and kind of enter negotiations. So we don't know exactly where that's going to stand yet, but I talked to the bill sponsor, Representative Alan Chester, about it, and he seemed to think it could be resolved pretty quickly, no matter what the end result ends up being. So this could get to Stein's desk pretty quickly. I'll note it passed with veto-proof majorities in both chambers. In the Senate, Republicans don't need any Democrats on board, and they didn't get any Democrats on board. It was a pure party line vote, but that's still enough to override a veto by the governor. Republicans lost their veto-proof supermajority in the state House back in the 2024 elections, however, which means that they will need at least one Democrat to essentially switch sides if they're going to override a veto by the governor. And again, they did get that. Fayetteville Democratic Representative Charles Smith sided with the GOP on this. He declined to comment for now. Obviously with a lot of moving pieces in the air, he's not exactly sure what the final version of the bill is even going to look like, nor is anybody else. So we'll see, if in the end he ends up voting for it again, or if he'll vote, on the veto override. We don't know that yet, but this is definitely setting up a big fight between the governor and the legislature.
Well, we know you're going to be watching closely. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran for his explainer on the REINS Act. Go to the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.